Sexual immorality, sexual sins. Do we take them too lightly or do we not take them serious enough? Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Espresso with Sky, giving you a fresh perspective on faith, life, God, and the Bible. I am Pastor Sky. These are my two sidekicks. Hope you guys are having an amazing week. If you haven't done so, like, subscribe, whatever, hit all those buttons that you want. But the most important thing is leave a comment below. Would love to hear what you think about today's topic. Now, if you want to support this ministry, we got PayPal and buymeacoffee.com. So let's begin this serious topic. Now, today's topic of sexual immorality and sins can be a touchy topic, but it's different from person to person. But what I'm going to say is, in general, we take it way too lightly. Now, why? Well, if you look in society today, I do think most believers will agree that society has made it much of a norm to see sexual things, whether in TVs, movies, social media, advertising, it's everywhere. You can't go anywhere without seeing it. And that's why it's kind of become a norm to us, because a lot of things we're growing numb to, and now our level of what we think is acceptable kind of changes with time because we see so much of it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the Bible, and I want everyone to reset their minds of how serious should we take it. Am I really taking it too lightly? Let's see 3 reasons why we are taking it way too lightly today. So let's take a look at the first reason, and we're going to look at punishment. How did God punish sexual sins in the Old Testament and the New Testament? Now, we're not here to scare you with the punishments. We're here to show you how severe or serious sexual sins are in God's perspective. So, in the Old Testament, what is the worst possible punishment you can get? It is death. How many sins are punishable by death? 12. And of the 12, how many are sexual sins? 4. 1/3 of the worst sins in the Old Testament are sexual sins, which also includes adultery. Now think about this, guys. Today, if someone commits adultery, are we killing them? Is it that severe to us? And the answer is, it's not. And think about this. Well, if 4 sins are sexual, and these are the worst of the worst sins, what other sins is God like comparing these sexual sins with? Murder, kidnapping, striking your parents, cursing your parents, worshiping other gods, not observing the Sabbath. That is the level of sexual sins in the Old Testament. It is not something that is taken lightly even by God, because it's put at the highest level of sins with the highest type of punishment. And that's something we have to think about. Are we taking it too lightly? Let's move to the New Testament. There's a great verse in Revelation chapter 22, verse 15. And you know what it says? Outside of heaven, outside the walls of heaven, are people who are sexually immoral. So even the sexually immoral are outside the walls of heaven, and the Bible even compares them to dogs. They compare them to animals. Another interesting verse is 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18. And what it says here is, sexual sins are the only sins that you commit against your own body. All other sins are outside of it. So when you think about this, it's like, wow, there is something that we don't really realize about sexual sins. But when you see the punishments, in the Old Testament, it was physical death. But in the New Testament, it even says it's spiritual death. That anyone who is sexually immoral was outside the walls of heaven. That's the first thing that I want you to think about, to make you think more deeply about, man, are these sexual sins, man, are we taking them too lightly or not serious enough? So now let's take a look at the second reason, and we are going to look at the definition for the word for sexual immorality, or the word fornication. Now, interestingly, in Hebrew, the word fornication has 2 separate meanings. The first that we know is sexual actions between 2 people that are not married to each other. But the second one is really deep. It means idolatry. It means worshiping other gods. And we're like, what? It means that? Yes. In the Old Testament time, God always called Israel as a woman. He said, my virgin Israel, my daughter Israel, always referred to Israel as a singular woman. And if you look at verses like Ezekiel chapter 6 verse 9, it says that Israel lusted herself at other gods, whored herself out. God compared fornication to what? To worshiping other idols. Why? Israel was meant only for God. They were supposed to be that couple, only the two of them and no one else. But what did Israel do? They would turn their hearts away from God and begin to whore themselves out, lust after other gods. God compared fornication not only to the sexual act, but also a spiritual act of worshiping other gods. Now, why is this super important? This is so important because in the Bible, God compares two things to show how important something is. Let me give you an example. Let's take a look at the words of God. How important are the words of God? And there's a verse in the Bible, it's in Matthew chapter 4, verse 4. Basically, Jesus in the desert, and Jesus answers to Satan and says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." What does Jesus do? He compares the words of God to food. How extreme is that parable, that comparison? He's comparing the words of God to food, showing you this is how important the words of God are. It's like food. Well, how important is food? You cannot live without it. You can't live without food. You have to eat it every day, once, twice, 3 times a day in order for you to live properly. That's how important the words of God are. Now, what is God comparing fornication, sexual immorality to? Worshiping other gods. Wait a second. Well, how important to God, or how bad is it to God if you worship another god? It is the first commandment in the 10 commandments. It is the worst thing you can do, is to worship another god. Worshiping another god, God compares that to fornication, to sexual immorality. That's how high God is looking at sexual immorality. In God's eyes, it's not as light as you think. It's much bigger than you think, that it's the same as worshiping another god. That's the level he's putting it on. And that's something that we really have to think about deeply in our hearts is, wow, could this really be that serious? And the more and more you read the Bible, the more and more you'll see how serious God is looking at sexual immorality. That is the second reason. Let's get into the third and final reasoning for today, and that is we were only meant to be with one person in our lifetime. Yes, only one. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 19, verse 5 and 6, a man and a woman will both leave their families. The two will become one flesh. And then he continues and says, whatever God has put together, let no one separate. The person that you are with, that you have joined yourself with, should be the only one. And for us, I'm sorry, where it comes to like, oh my gosh, only one, we're not talking about dating. We're talking about sexual immorality when you're not married, right? We're talking about that one person you're supposed to connect and be with physically, mentally, spiritually. We're only supposed to have one in our lifetime. You know what the average number of sexual partners an American has over 18? Over 7 people in their lifetime. So we're thinking to ourselves, oh, you know what? I'm at 3 or 4. Isn't 3 or 4 okay because it's under the average? No, we're not looking for what's the average in society and where do we fall around what the world thinks. What we're trying to figure out is, what does God want? Right? That's where we're trying to set our goals upon. Yeah, of course, there's unfortunate circumstances, but in general, we're always looking for that one person, and what God has put together, let no one separate. So I hope this kind of opens our eyes, makes us think a lot deeper of how lightly or how seriously we're taking sexual sins and sexual immorality. And I hope it's something that made you think deep enough to rethink, wow, what am I doing with my life right now? All right. All right, thank you so much for joining us today on Espresso with Sky. My name is Sky. Here's my 2 sidekicks for today. Have an awesome week. Yes, today was a very serious subject, but I didn't want to make it too serious, but I wanted to make it a little bit lighter, but I hope you enjoyed it. Everyone have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.